Hey guys, this is Lucas from Better Coding Academy, and in this video we are going to be wrapping up our review of the React To-Do project I've got over here. So what we're going to have a look at today specifically is Redux. So we're going to look at how this application uses Redux, and I'm going to give my comments on the use of Redux in this project. Now, first of all, as a disclaimer, for those of you watching, I am not a huge fan of Redux. So if you are a huge fan of Redux, then you might disagree with me in this video, but that's okay, because at one point I used to use a lot of Redux as well, but I have found that it is actually not necessarily the best tool to use for the job 100% of the time. And that's the point that I want to make here. So let's jump into it. We've got an index.js here, which is the root thing here. And then we also see that there's a store. So in the store here, we've got Redux as expected. So you kind of have a store file, or sometimes you have a directory called store. And then you have create store, and then they've got the dev tools for browsers and whatnot. And we've got the reducers up here. So this just bothers me a lot. So I'm going to just fix that up. So now we've got the Redux Thunk as well. It is a middleware which we're kind of applying to our Redux store. So what the Redux Thunk middleware does is it allows us to do asynchronous loading within our reducers, because previously you couldn't actually do that. So now you can do it within the actions here. So if you look over here, they've got async actions here, which then do posts to users and to auth and all that kind of stuff. So it's just basically a way to allow you to do async actions from within Redux. So that's one popular way to do it. The other way is to use sagas, but I guess my point here in this video is just to showcase how Redux is being implemented across the app. And if you have a look through the actual code yourself, is that you'll find that a lot of this application is built around Redux, and pretty much everything is kind of embedded in Redux in one way or another. So I'm going to showcase that here with the app, and I actually forgot to install the DevTools extension, so I'm going to do that right now. Is you just go to Chrome, you just type in Redux DevTools extension here. You wait for the autocomplete thing to load. This is really weird. I always find that when you're typing here, it has to wait for all of these autocompletes to finish before it loads anything. Maybe that's just me, but that's been the case for me for over a year now, every single time, so I don't know. Anyways, so I want to add that in, add extension like so. And now that we've got it over here, let's just refresh this page here, and you see that it comes up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop this one out in a new window, and I've got it over here, and I'm going to make this one just a tad bigger so we can have a look at it. So the first thing you'll notice off the bat is we have some stuff here for Redux form, and we also have user loading, clear errors, user loaded, user loading, clear errors, fetch to-dos. So now if we also have a look at the current state, we've got auth, filter, form, and to-dos. So inside of auth, we have the token here, which is stored, and the user. Okay, so as I said before as well, it's probably not a good idea to have the JWT token stored in a place where it can be accessed by Chrome extensions and by the code on your page. It's a much better idea to just leave it in an HTTP only cookie, and then just basically every single time you want to check if the user is authenticated, you just send a request to the server, because this token can be spoofed anyways. So whenever you make a check, it's probably a better idea to just validate that with the server. So anyways, we've got auth over here. We got a filter, current selected. I'm not really too sure what that's for, but I'm pretty sure it's based upon the page over here. So we've got form as well with day sort, and then we've got to-dos. So I want to show something here, which is if I put this thing over on the right here and I just do that on the left. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to new to-do, and you'll notice that it first registers a whole bunch of fields, which is kind of crazy. But then if we type inside here, let's just say go to gym, as it shows there, you'll notice that it sends a whole bunch of change requests here. So we've got change requests for the letters. So we got go T, and then go to space, G, Y, M, and so on. It just keeps going down. So what's actually going on here is the whole of this form is bound into Redux. Now, this is something which is caused by Redux form, obviously. So if you look at the code over here, we've got, if you go to add to do, you'll notice that we're using, okay, so we got to do form inside of here. And then if we just go to do form, which is from here. And so now we've got the to do form here, which uses the fields, and the fields are based around Redux form. So that's how that works. And it uses Redux form in order to do all of the, so the Redux form is down here, and the form name is to do form. and it uses the field. So it's all tied into Redux. Now, personally, I am not a big fan of this kind of use of Redux, but let's just keep going. Let's have a look at how else they are using Redux in this project. So if you also notice is that if we go back to home, and it does fetch to-dos, which contains the to-dos that were fetched. And let's just maybe add one more for today. So let's actually just add one. Go to gym, bring a banana, and let's just say this one's a work one, and let's add this to-do. So now we've got go to gym here, and this information is, if we check over here inside of state, and we go to user loaded, there we go, we should have to-dos, and we have the two to-dos here. So we actually have one more, which comes up from a previous day. So that one is on the 14th of August. So that one here, and we've got walk the dog over here. So you'll notice that everything here is very closely tied into the Redux store. So you can think of it as like, for example, you have every component on your page. Well, in this case, the majority of components, which are related to data anyways, tied in some way or another into the Redux store. Now, this is actually, in my opinion, an overuse of Redux. So Redux has a very specific purpose. The purpose of Redux is to implement the Flux pattern across your React app in a global sense. It's not meant to be the place where you store the data for every single component. Now, when you have something like a Redux form, I don't really like Redux form either, because it completely goes against the idea of a form. The idea of a form is that all of the data for that form is encapsulated and it is stored within said form, and it doesn't need to go into the global state. But when you have Redux form enabled, what it actually does is it has a lot of this information stored inside of a global state where it really just shouldn't be there. Like, for example, when I was typing inside of here, it shouldn't need to come up inside of the form property here in this global Redux store. It just shouldn't be available here, which is why I prefer libraries like React Final Form. I personally use this one, and also one called Formic. So these ones kind of do a very similar thing. They allow you to kind of have that same level of flexibility. So they will also have things like the field component here and very simple syntax to set up. But what it actually allows you to do is just store the form state in a local place, local to your component, local to your form, without having to keep it in the global state. So I just think that putting it in the global state in this case is a complete misuse. It's an abuse of Redux in this case. So in what cases should Redux be used? So I would argue that auth in this case is a good use of Redux. So other than storing the token here, which I'm kind of like iffy about security wise, but everything else here inside the auth is fine, right? Like, you should be able to store information relevant to the current session. In other words, information that's relevant to the whole page, the whole app inside of your Redux store. If something isn't relevant to your whole app, even though like your app might be a to-do app and you're storing to-dos, that's still not technically relevant to your whole application. So my argument would be to not store that in the global state. There are certain other things that you might want to store in the global Redux store. For example, you might want to store the current theme. If you have, say, for example, theme customization, you might want to store things like, light mode or dark mode or something like that. But when you have something like to-dos being stored in there, form being stored in there, and whatever filter is, it starts to really not make sense, and you start to have an overload of information in a place where it doesn't belong. And one more thing is that it doesn't really help at all that the syntax for Redux is extremely verbose. So every single time you're trying to update something, change something, you have to go from your components and see where it's being used. Like, for example, you have to go, say, into home to-do list, and you have to open up to-do list only to realize that it's actually coming from form.day sort. What's this here? So you have like, oh wait, what? This is day sort, and it also uses to-dos. So it uses a form.day sort. Is that from a Redux form? Okay, where's day sort? And then you have to go to the side. You have to search for day sort. You have to find where day sort comes from, and then you also have to find the to-dos reducer. So you go, okay, so reducers over here. We got to-do reducer. And oh my goodness gracious, what is this? So then you have to kind of look through all of this and figure out where this comes from, how this data is represented, and before you know it, you're back here debugging every single change that's going on, testing every single use case. It's just not really friendly, right? And let's just keep this going. So let's just say we're looking at to-dos, and then we've got to-do reducer, and we've got all of these from actions/types. So we got actions up here, and we got index, which contains a whole bunch of stuff, and then we also got types. We got index.js, where we're importing all of these, and then we go down and we have so many methods. Why do we have, okay, so we have login over here and log out, and we also have load user, set current selected day, set to do complete, clear current to do, set. Okay, so very, very quickly, as you can tell, it starts to become kind of bloaty. It becomes very overloaded. Like just looking at this code here, like 165 lines of stuff that I have to go through just in order to make a simple change on to-dos. And this is after I found the file that I'm looking for. Before I was looking inside to-do list. And then from here, I'd have to kind of go through, I'd have to understand how all of this works. I'd have to realize that it's tied into the Redux store in a specific way that is relevant to both Redux form and also to the to-dos here. And then from there, I have to debug and then get to that 165 line file, was it? 165 line file. And then go through that whole thing to figure out what exactly I'm trying to change. So that is why I'm not a big fan of Redux. Now, let me give you a few alternatives. So the first alternative I've already said for the form is you can use something like React Final Form or Formic, which just stores it more locally. Now, the other thing that really is your friend here is the use of the context API. So React has a new context API that was released in version 16. So the new context API essentially just allows you to work with the context in a lot nicer way. So it allows you to do create context and just work with that very efficiently. And then you also have the latest use context hook, which really just lets you put it into any component. So that's really, really handy. And the truth is that you should really understand how to use that before you start looking into things like Redux, because Redux is based on the principles of use context and of the context API. So if you don't really understand how the context API works, it becomes very easy to abuse Redux in the wrong ways and accidentally. So that would be my suggestion here. With something like to-dos, you might want to store it relative to just this component here, or maybe like a component that kind of goes around this part here, because obviously you are also using it in the filter, but then that's something that you need to consider and you need to design properly. But chucking it all into Redux is really not the solution here. So that's all I've got for you in this video. I just really wanted to give my thoughts on Redux within this web app. And if you are using Redux and overusing it within your project, maybe consider refactoring to use more kind of, I guess, vanilla React, or maybe to better understand how all of this works before jumping into the deep end. But this has been Lucas with Better Coding Academy. I hope that you've enjoyed this series on code review, and see you guys later.